Good evening and welcome to Face for the Newsfirst team. I'm Niresh Aliathambi. Well, Cyclone Ditwa is still the topic of discussion and it will be for many weeks to come. And we have got the latest scientific reports as well, which have analyzed what kind of damage has been caused. And to discuss this and to discuss everything about those who have been affected, I have with me Lakmali Hemachandra, Member of Parliament and Attorney at Law. Good evening and welcome back to the show, Lakmali.
Good evening, Niresh.
Nice to have you.
Yes, good to be back.
And the circumstances are, of course, difficult because, as with, I think, most members of Parliament, you are hard at work. And you're working in the Colombo district, which is heavily affected as well. So what's it like in your area, your constituency?
The Colombo city, which I am working in, is not deeply affected. Only in the North Colombo area, we see some kind of impact of the floods. We see a little bit of impact in Timbrigasya Divisional Secretariat area as well, but it's not so severe when you compare it with, let's say, Kolonnava or Kaduwela and Sitawaka, which are the worst affected areas in the Colombo district. In Kolonnava, there is still a lot of work to be done, and I think there is a lot of support that is being drawn from the rest of the areas in Colombo as well to push through the cleaning process in Kolonnava and then restoring normalcy in the people's lives who's living in that area. So most of the work in Colombo is actually wrapping up, except for what is being done in Kolonnava, because it's at the right end of the river. There's a lot of waste that comes with the river when it comes with the flood, and that gets all collected in the Kolonnava area. So there's a lot of waste which has to be removed and then disposed. That is being done right now. And the whole district is actually supporting that process. Yeah. Excellent.
Now, to look at what is a UNDP analysis that has used satellite data, and also it has used data from on ground, which has come from the DMC and other agencies, and it's of course quite comprehensive, and it gives some startling numbers actually. 1/5 of Sri Lanka's land area was inundated. That's 20% of our land area. 11 million hectares were flooded, and 720,000 buildings were hit by the flood waters. That is 1 in every 12 buildings in Sri Lanka was hit by floods. And 2.3 million people were affected. More than half of them were women. Plus there were 522,000 children and 263,000 elderly persons. Interestingly, Colombo and Gampaha had about 60% of those affected. That's because those are, of course, the most highly populated districts. So those are amazing, astonishing numbers, but perhaps we expected it because we've seen it around the country over the last week and a half. Now, Lakmali, let me ask you about the people who were affected, and particularly you, of course, have campaigned for the rights of women and children for many years. Let's talk about the effect on women and children and other vulnerable communities, because they are hardest hit. It is not that men are not suffering, they are, but it's different when it comes to women and children, different requirements and so on. So what's your opinion on this?
So I mean, when you listen to the numbers, it's huge, which is why we also identify this as one of the largest catastrophes, disasters that has ever fallen on Sri Lanka. As you said, 1/5 of the country is actually affected in terms of land mass, and 2.3 million is a huge number in terms of our population as well, right? So we have, our focus is right now is on the humanitarian response, because you have a large number of people who are displaced, who are living in protection camps, in displacement camps, and they have to be given food, water, and when it comes to women and children, you also have to take care of their sanitary needs and all of that, which are very unique sometimes, right? So then that, I think, is being taken care of. The government, especially the Women's Affairs Ministry, has also gotten involved in providing these, not just the food and rations and all of that, but also equipment and other supplies which women and children particularly need when they're living in these camps. So that's one of the areas in terms of the immediate response. Then of course we have also started on rebuilding the infrastructure that was destroyed. That is, as you said, the railways, the roads, and the buildings, even government buildings, schools and preschools. All of these buildings are affected. So the president has specifically asked for each ministry to come up with a requirement that they need. So if it's Women's Affairs Ministry, for example, they have to come up with a number of preschools that they have to develop, and maybe the education ministry will have schools and so on. So they will have to rebuild and develop all those infrastructure which is necessary for education. And hospitals, there are a large number of hospitals also affected. I think Halavata Hospital was one of them. There was Mahiangan Hospital. So we managed to open most of these hospitals, but still in terms of developing them and bringing them to normalcy, there is a process, right? So that is the focus right now. And also making sure that people who are actually moving out of these camps, for example in Colombo, in most areas the floods have gone down and there were no landslides, so people can actually go back to their houses, but then the houses were flooded, they are not clean, they have to clean the houses, maybe the house equipment were destroyed. So make sure that people can have a somewhat smooth recovery and transition back to their houses. So that is also why we have given the 25,000 rupees allowance, and then there's a 50,000 allowance again to clean your houses and make sure that you have the right equipment when you go back. I think that itself, especially these are things, because we were also involved in getting people to move before the floods, right? Especially in Colombo, when we go and talk to people, one of the main things that they said was they have the gas cylinder at home that they don't want to leave behind. There is some equipment that they don't want to leave behind because there are other threats. Thieves might come in, there are drug addicts in certain areas, right? So people were refusing to move because they were so worried about what happens afterwards actually, right? Okay, you move, then you come back, then who takes care of you afterwards? So the fact that the government has allocated this much money into making sure that people can move to their houses, to move back to their houses smoothly, somewhat smoothly, is, I think, specifically helpful for women. And if you look at the children, there is also 25,000 being given to every family to make sure that children can continue schooling, that there is no disruption in their schooling, and so there's to bring about that normalcy for families. When you look at families, it's not just the house, right? You also need your equipment is there, you need to clean your house, you need to send your child back to school. If you're doing a small business, you need help with that, and all of that is actually addressed in the relief package that the president announced on the last day of the budget. So I think this the relief package itself has a lot of focus on what women and children will be affected with. And if you look at what the president has been doing for the past few days, he has been going around the country to all these districts which were affected and stressing on the fact that schools need to be reopened on time. Even in Colombo, we are making sure that schools are cleaned. They are not, if there are damages, they are quickly recovered, and schools are reopened back for children, because you can't let this disaster take, it can't affect our children more than what it has already affected, right? So we have to make sure that they can restart their lives. There's some normalcy brought back to their lives. So that stress is there, and mainly because Prime Minister is also the Education Minister. There's a lot of emphasis on that. So this is the process that we will be taking immediately to make sure that infrastructure, roads, railways will take a bit of time, but definitely the roads, that connectivity is brought back, and there is a place for people to stay, whether it is the displacement camp or whether they're going back to their houses, that they can, there won't be any inadequacy, and as much as we can provide, we will be able to provide, take care of the people, and not leave them behind and make them feel very isolated in the aftermath of the disaster. So that is something that the government has been very focused on and very concerned about. Yeah.
And speaking of moving back, I think the relief package that the President described includes funds to pay for rented houses. In case the house was destroyed, you can rent a house. I think it was for 3 months, and the rent, I think, up to, was it 25,000 would be paid. So so it seemed to me, when I was watching the President describing all these relief measures, it seemed to me that the planning for this package actually came from the point of view of what the people would require, rather than what can the Treasury afford, or so, from the other end. So and then there were, of course, questions, well, how would the government pay for this? But of course the money can be found. You can find it, donor agencies, foreign governments, and our own budget can, be repurposed for this. So it was very refreshing to see this approach, looking at what the people need to get back to normalcy. Now the word normalcy, right now I think the whole nation is in a state of shock. Even if your house wasn't flooded, just the fact that we are living in a country where we had such a disaster, everybody is in a state of shock, and you're quite right that we need to get back to normal life as fast as possible, don't we?
Yeah, we have to, because the more we dwell on what has happened, we want to make sure that especially the people who have suffered through this, the victims of the disaster, can get back to normal lives as fast as possible. That's the main target of the government, right? And I mean, I'm very glad that you notice that the relief package has been designed with people in the center of it, without thinking too much about, not that it is, I mean, as the President said, this is not some emotional offering that we are doing. This is a very thoroughly thought out and well planned relief package. We are not doing this because we are emotional about what has happened. We think this is a necessity, right? This is a necessity, and I think for the first time in our history, we have that necessity being prioritized, as opposed to everything else that, there are other restraints, financial constraints. We are recovering from a bankruptcy, we are in an IMF program. All of those constraints are there. But even so, our people and their needs have to be prioritized, right? So we are actually hoping to allocate 500 billion next year for recovery purposes, and 50 billion is already allocated from the supplementary. So you can always, like Niresh, like you said, you can always, I mean, one of the first things that I thought about when this package was pronounced in the parliament was, because we have seen other disasters. I mean, not to compare, I really don't want to compare with the disaster responses of the previous governments, but if you look at places like Miriabed, and Aranayaka and even Meetotamulla, you see that people had to really fight for some relief after the disaster itself, right? And genuinely, as an outsider who was not involved with the government at that point, I was also under the impression that our treasury is constrained. We are a poor country, there are limitations to what we can offer, right? But then you can actually work around these things and prioritize people's needs, which is what we are trying to do right now. We have to make sure that children are back at schools, people who have lost their livelihoods can actually go back to economic activity. Whether you are if you look at the package, you have something for fisheries, you have something for small scale businesses, and if your commercial establishments are destroyed, you have compensation for that. If your factories are destroyed, there's compensation for that, and the government is making sure that you can go back to, and as the president said, it's not just going back to normalcy, it's also going back to an improved status of living, which is why even if you're like you said, even if just your roof is taken off by the winds, even if it's just a tahadukala, like he said, right, it's not a house. You're not living in a house if it's that easily shaken. So you need to be able to live in a house that won't be shaken when the next winds come. So for that we will be giving money to rebuild, right? So that is the approach that we are taking. It's an extremely sympathetic, empathetic, and extremely, I think, people-centric way of looking at what was lost and how we can compensate for that. And especially for women, I think, because women are the center of households, and after every disaster they will have to pick the pieces, make sure that your child goes back to school, make sure that your family is not falling apart, rebuilding your houses, get into debt. There's the process is very complicated. And I think for women, not to say that just because you don't have specific allocations for women, that doesn't mean that these allocations, this package will have a lesser impact on women. I think most of the concerns that women have as wives, as mothers, are actually taken care of under the package, and I'm sure that is why there is a very warm response from people also to the government response, right, to the post-disaster response. And there are other things that we want to do in terms of how to relocate, how to make sure that people are not going back to unsafe living conditions, regardless of what has happened during the previous governments, regardless of whether permissions were given to build these buildings or not. It's our people who will be living in these unsafe conditions, right? And vulnerable communities in terms of, so if you look at the disaster, like you said, most of the landslides and most of the deaths are actually coming from uphill country, in the central province.
Right, central, yeah. And yes, mainly central, also in the Badulla district.
Yeah, so these are already very poverty-stricken areas, and now there's a double disaster on them. Even if you look at Colombo, the most affected people are actually people living in underserved settlements, or who are living in what we call unauthorized settlements. These are really poor people who have nowhere to go. So you have to make sure that they are very safely relocated. Maybe not aggressively relocated, but supportively. This is why we are offering them money to, if your land is affected, if your house is affected, it's not just a nominal amount, it's actually an amount that you can use to relocate yourself. That is the focus, and we are actually thinking of doing something differently in the Colombo district as well, because we don't have a lot of land in Colombo for relocation, so we have to see how we relocate people who are living in Kolonnava and North Colombo area. So let's see. There's a lot of thought that is being put into this subject as we go on.
Right, and it is in a way to try to bring about a sense of normalcy as fast as possible, isn't it?
Yeah. We believe that people have to get back to their lives, and we have seen how disasters have disrupted that. You see how families fall into poverty. You see how whole districts are falling into poverty, and their development is completely disrupted by disasters. And if our reality is that we face disasters most of the time, it is very important that we have disaster responses also proportionate to that, right? So I think our government's policy is that we leave no one behind, whether it was before the disaster or after the disaster. Our main focus is that we are not leaving anybody behind. And when you are at a specially disadvantaged, when you are put in a specially disadvantaged position like this, then you have to put extra effort into making sure that people are not left behind. And not just women and children, but the elderly, the disabled people, all of these people will have specific circumstances that they have to face. And I think the government, even you look at how when the political leadership of the government is responding, you can very clearly see that the divisional secretaries, the district secretaries, and even all the government institutions are advised to be very keen on what the people need. So, to customize our operations on what the people need, which is why the Treasury has also shown a lot of flexibility in releasing these funds. 50 million to the divisional secretary, 100 million to the district secretaries, 100 million to ministry secretaries, right? So there's a lot of flexibility allowed for them to use money to make sure that recovery is really rapid, and that when people need something, you don't have to think about money when you have to offer something, right? Which is the least the government can do right now. So I think that is a good response. I'm not saying this because I'm from the government, but I think I have seen responses throughout, let's say, the last 20 years. And instead of blaming it on the people and saying, to be very honest, there is a certain contributory factor also to all these disasters, right? But there's no point of talking about it right now. We have to move forward. And even to encourage people to relocate, the government has to build confidence that we are going to support them through that process. What happens otherwise is the government officials will go and say, oh, this is a dangerous place to live. You have to relocate, but then you have to find a way to relocate on your own, right? That is not what we are going to do. We are going to make sure that we find the land, we build the houses, make sure that people are relocated, and make sure that when we have to anticipate disasters, but in case of another disaster, that people are not living in unsafe living conditions.
Right. So a lot of interesting points there, which we will go into a bit further. But right now we need to take a short commercial break. I am in conversation with Lakmali Hemachandra, Member of Parliament. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Valuable FD, the symbol of stability.
Thursday at 6:30 p.m.
Valuable FD, the symbol of stability.
අපේම මිනිසුන් වෙනුවෙන් අපේ මනුෂ්‍යත්වයේ දෑත් දිගු කරමු. සිරස ශක්ති සහන යාත්‍රා.
සහල්,
පරිප්පු,
සොයාමිට්,
ටින්මාලු,
නූඩල්ස්,
බිස්කට්
ඔබට හැකි පමණ ගෙනවිත් බාර දෙන්න.
භාණ්ඩ එකතු කිරීමේ මධ්‍යස්ථාන කොළඹ 2 සිරස මාධ්‍යජාලයේ මූලස්ථානය.
දෙපානම විකාශන මධ්‍යස්ථානය.
ගාල්ල කහදුවවත්ත මන්සන්ධියේ සහන යාත්‍රා මෙහෙයුම් මැදිරිය. සිරස ශක්ති සහන යාත්‍රා.
එන්න විපතට පත්ත ජීවිත වෙත සහනයක් වන්නට.
අපත් සමග එකතු වන්න. සිරස ශක්ති සහන යාත්‍රා ශනික ඇමතුම් අංකය 076 55 25 03.
Valuable FD, the symbol of stability.
ඔයා දන්න තැනක් තියෙනවද?
ඔව්. මමගේ පස්සෙන් එන්න.
උඹ ගැන නම් දුකයි කොල්ලෝ. ඒත් කරන්න දෙයක් නැහැ.
මේ හැමදේම මේලිට කිව්වොත් මොකක් වෙයිද? ඒත් එහෙම වුණොත් එයා මේක නවීට කියනවා.
ඔක්කොටම කලින් ඔය සර්ම ගලවලා ඉන්නකෝ.
මොකක්ද? සර්ම ගලව? බෑ බෑ සර්ම. සර්ම ගලවන්නේ.
රාත්‍රී 8ට
සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්
අපරාධ නීතිය මගින් ලබා දෙන දඬුවමක වැඩි අවධානය යොමු කළ යුත්තේ වින්දිතයාට යුක්තිය ලබා දීමටද වරද කරුවාව පුනරුත්ථාපනය කිරීමටද?
අපරාධ යුක්ති ක්‍රියාදාමය ඇතුලේ මිනිස්සුන්ගේ පැත්තෙන් ඒ අපරාධ යුක්තිය හිට ගන්න ඕනේ.
ලංකාව මිනිමරුවාට මරණ දණ්ඩනය දෙනවා. ස්ත්‍රී දූෂකයාට අවුරුදු 20ක් දක්වා සිය දඬුවම් ලබා දෙනවා. දැන් ලංකාව වගේ රටක් ඇතුලේ සරලවම කියනවා නම් පුනරුත්ථාපන ක්‍රියාවලියක් කියන්නේම අවිනිශ්චිත ක්‍රියාවලියක් ගරු බුද්ධිමතුනේ. ඉවෙත් අපරාධ යුක්ති පද්ධතියේ අරමුණුගත වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. සෑම වරදකරුවෙක්ම සමාජගත කරන්න. එකී වූ ඉලක්කගත අරමුණ තෘප්ත කරන්න. අපරාධ නීතියේදී මොකද්ද වෙන්න ඕන?
Sirasa Debater with AAT Sri Lanka.
ඉරිදා සවස 6ට.
Welcome back to Face to Face. I'm with Lakmali Hemachandra, Member of Parliament. Now, Lakmali, let me take you a few years or months perhaps into the future when the next disaster hits. And we will have one. It might take 10 years, but things do happen in all parts of the world. When the next disaster hits, what should we have improved having learnt from this disaster? And I think there's no one government department or official or anything like that. It's all around, and I think we need to perhaps start with the people, society. Now, you mentioned that people are reluctant to leave their homes and go. That's because they do have what are to them valuable. You lose your gas cylinder. Well, that's quite an expense, isn't it? A new gas cylinder is quite expensive. So you don't want to lose that. So what do we do about things like that? And your TV, perhaps your wife went and slaved away in the Middle East for several years, and you've got a TV and a fridge to show for it. Probably no one's going to cart off the fridge, but what about the TV? So what do you do about those things? Because you can't actually prevent the theft because it's a disaster situation, it's underwater, thieves might come in and take some of these things. But how do you persuade people that their lives are worth more than the gas cylinders and the TVs, and how do you get them to move, and how do we prepare for the next disaster at that local level?
Yeah, I think Niresh, I think President also mentioned this in his speech as well. Our state institutions overall are not fully prepared for disasters, right? When we were young, when we were brought up, we were told that Sri Lanka is a country that will not have. That was what we were very famously proud about the fact that this is not a country prone to natural disasters, right? I think that changed with the tsunami. When the tsunami hit Sri Lanka, we started thinking about disasters a little bit more seriously, which is where some of the laws have also been brought in. But I think even though the laws are there, this is something that we see very commonly in our system. You have all these commissions, all these councils, institutions that should have been prepared. Not to say that they were not prepared. I'm not taking anything away from them, but I think we need to have a stronger sense of disaster, right? Without considering it as something ad hoc or one-off incidents, we have to consider them to be something that we have to face very frequently, and as something that we need to take into consideration in our everyday planning. So that is something that will change. We will make sure that all of these threats, which is why even relocation, like Colombo is not severely affected, right? But we want to Colombo in the sense the Colombo city. But for the past year itself, we have been thinking about small pockets which gets flooded. How do we move those people out of those areas? So these are, and we could also see that certain state institutions were not very sympathetic towards these concerns, right? So a little bit of flood is something that you can live with. That could have been the response. But I think moving forward, we have to make sure that we have to understand that this flood that we faced, it is one of the biggest floods that has come to Sri Lanka. I think after 1989, the highest meter reading for the flood in Colombo. So we have to expect more of this, right? So for that, you have to build systems. Make sure that every division secretary is fully equipped, fully prepared, with knowledge also, and with operational procedures to make sure that people are evacuated, that there is relief provided, and all that, right? And you have to also strengthen these institutions. It's not just enough to just tell them to do stuff. You also have to allocate money, finance them, which is something, because we are coming out of a crisis, economic crisis also. So most of our local councils, most of our divisional secretaries, district secretaries, most of our state institutions were starved of financing. They didn't have equipment. They didn't have the, even now we are struggling with finding the correct number of compactors, the correct number of tippers and lorries to actually move the waste. Because we were coming out of a crisis, we'd had a financial crisis, so we didn't have money to allocate, so on and so on. So our institutions were starved. But throughout the last year, one thing that we have done is rebuild those state institutions, whether it's the local councils. Like if you look at the budget that we brought last year, even before the disaster, there was a lot of emphasis on developing the capacity of local councils and state institutions, right? So I think it's still necessary. That is a road that we have to take. And also we have to prepare people. Our people, I mean, not to blame them, I'm not victim blaming or anything, but our people are not fully trained, I would say. This is also the responsibility of the state. You have to train people, you have to educate people constantly in an effective manner to evacuate them very fast. So
I think you need to conduct actual drills for this. It's, in many countries you have, whether it is church bells or loudspeakers, which are usually used for religious purposes, and in Sri Lanka every kilometer or so you have some kind of religious establishment, and they've all got loudspeakers, so we have that kind of infrastructure, but we need to perhaps integrate it and create that awareness and that training, as you said. When people hear the loudspeakers or the sirens or whatever, they will automatically, take whatever belongings and move to the particular center, and they need to know what is the designated the safe place that they should move to. So and those who are in charge of that safe place also need to then be prepared to deal with an entire neighborhood moving there. So I think you can't do these things on paper.
You can't.
You have to do it in practice.
You have to finance it first of all, and then you have to implement these programs, right? And I mean, I think this is also one of the problems that we have. We have a culture of not taking the weather seriously. So we have to make sure that our forecasting is very precise, and our forecasting is delivered in a precise manner. It's mostly done, I mean, there is a well-functioning Met department, and if you look at like immediately before this cyclone, there was another cyclone, and the Met department had actually informed the fisheries, the fishermen and the boats and all of that, and there were zero casualties, right? So we have a good department, but we also have to give them the equipment, empower them technologically to make sure that our forecasting is precise, so that people would actually take it seriously. If the forecasting is not precise, if it's very vague and ambiguous, then nobody is going to understand it, and especially for laymen, right? Even for people like us, we are not weather experts. So there has to be some kind of specificity and precision in forecasting. And then you also need to have all these institutions acting together, which is what the DMC is supposed to do. But then I think we have, for a very long period of time, we have neglected that responsibility in the state. And this is the time to rebuild that capacity. and make sure that right after the tsunami there was a lot of interest in that. This is why the laws were also brought in, but then over time, gradually, once we forget the disasters, we get used to what is normal, and a few number of people dying per year is treated as normal. Houses getting flooded to a certain extent is treated as normal. So that we should move away from that kind of thinking, even from the state, right? And we have to make sure that flood control, especially, we look at the past few years, floods have been a constant problem for Sri Lanka. But even so, our flood controlling systems are very weak. So we have to make sure that there's proper investment into building that infrastructure, flood control infrastructure, not just the roads and the railways, but moving forward. So we have the plan for the government is to make sure that rebuilding Sri Lanka becomes a huge redevelopment drive. And when we do that redevelopment, when we build the roads again, when we build the railways and the schools and the hospitals again, we cannot be doing it in a context of no disasters, right? We have to learn from what has happened, and we have to build those, we have to inbuild the disaster into the system and make sure that
disaster preparedness.
Yeah, disaster preparedness has to be inbuilt. And so talking about where people should live, we don't have enough public spaces sometimes. Only the temple and the religious spaces are available for people to actually go and stay, and the schools. And so we need to have community centers, daycare centers, elderly care centers. These are facilities that should have been there, which we could have used for requirements like disasters as well, right? But we don't have those built in our communities. We only have the temple and the school. So having those facilities also developed as we go along, where people can actually gather. There will be some kind of a kitchen. These are, because those are the requirements that you need. You need to have a kitchen, you need to have washrooms, you need to have places to sleep. So you need to have those. There are other facilities that you can build which are normally used for different purposes.
Right.
But then, like the school.
Yes.
The school on a regular day is used for the school. But when there's a disaster, it becomes a disaster camp, right? Because it's already equipped. So I think these are also little things that we need to pay attention to, so that people get used to more comfortable public spaces, commune spaces that you can come to and stay. In terms of compensation, of course, that is something that we have already rectified. But building that preparedness into the system is something that the government has to work on.
Right. And as you said, we have got used to this, it's raining, it's flooding, and the same neighborhoods get flooded
every year.
Yeah. Every monsoon we have the same alerts. In Colombo, it's the Kalani River, and a few other areas.
Even
that
landslides.
You mentioned. Yes. So it's the same area, but you don't see any firm moves or projects to clear that particular neighborhood, because it is prone to flooding. So we need to think in that way rather than every year this is going to get flooded and people need to move, and then they come back, and then the next year they get flooded again.
So I think, instead of, as a government, we are glad, we are not glad that the disaster happened, but we are very receptive of the response of the people, even when it's concerned about preparedness, right? Because I think our state institutions have to redesign themselves in this preparedness and also delivering the relief very promptly. To their credit, I think they have done a wonderful job of delivering the relief in a very efficient manner, right? So there might be certain inadequacies and insufficiencies in certain places, but I think overall it has been very fast. But I think now we have to make sure that preparedness is also that seriously taken at every level, right? So which is something that I think even the relocation plan that the government has proposed, so beyond 5,000 meters that you can't, you don't have to do kilometers.
5,000 feet, I believe.
5,000 feet, yeah. That you should not have areas where highly populated. So I think this is something that we should have thought about and done because landslides have been happening, even though the floods were not common.
Right.
Landslides had been happening for quite some time, and most of these areas are actually marked as landslide prone, right? Especially in the upcountry.
Right.
So this is something that we should have thought about and done. But now, because we have to confront the reality and the consequences of ignoring those signs for a really long time. And I think it's good that the government and the state is ready to move forward with a very transformative response to disasters, which is what we need. Disasters happen, bad things happen. I mean, history is filled with that. There are wars, there are natural disasters, there have been all kinds of calamities on people, but we have to make sure that these are transformative when we go forward. We should not go back to where we were. And we have to redesign our institutions, our policies, and the way we behave to adapt to these situations. Instead of making do with the attitude that, okay, this happens, every year floods come, landslides happen, people don't move. That is, I really don't think that is the attitude that the state should have.
Right.
Which is why I think even the fact that people did not move is a response to a accumulated, frustration that people have. It happens over a period of time. When the first tsunami struck, you would have moved, but then you get warnings. There are so many. There's no precision. There's no preparedness in the system. So people also get very frustrated. They don't want to put their whole lives on some not fully prepared system.
Right.
That is what I mean.
They need to have faith in the system.
They need to have faith in the system. Exactly. And I think this is exactly why the post-disaster response is doing a really wonderful job of building that faith.
Right.
So even when we go and talk to people, we can see that people are now ready to move. They're asking, how do we move? Where do we move? And because for the first time, I think they're thinking that there's a government that actually wants them to move, without making it an excuse for whatever whatever the disaster that might fall on them in the future and put it on them. Because we do consider it to be our responsibility. We do think that relocation is the state responsibility. People have to be incentivized to move. People have to be educated to move. And that has to be done through a government mechanism which builds enough faith with the people, right? Which is why the president himself is going and talking to people in the camps and asking them, are you ready to move? We'll give you a new house, are you willing to go? So that kind of engagement is required. And I really do think that even our state machinery will be refreshed and will have a different approach to all of these issues going forward.
Right. Now, if you look at most of the deaths, they were from landslides. And if you get caught in a landslide, the chances of survival are minimal. It's a wall of mud which engulfs you, and no one else can save you because they can't reach you. They can't step into the mud themselves. So it's different from just water flooding. Now, much of the upcountry has already been mapped by the NBRO. So that data, those maps are available. And according to the UNDP analysis, there were 1,200 landslides in this disaster. That's phenomenal. And in all probability, many of these particular landslides would have been in areas that the NBRO has already mapped. But basically people didn't move. And the local authorities, which of course are in charge of, if you want to build a house, you have to go to the Pradeshya Sabha and get it approved. The local authorities don't seem to have acted on the NBRO information either. So you have that disconnect in the entire system, which has been inbuilt over the decades. So that kind of thing now has to be, you need a rethink of that.
Yeah, definitely. constructions of houses and commercial establishments, hotels and so on, in these mountainous areas and along the river banks has been, I think it has escalated over the past few years. And the way we treat the nature has also changed, right? There's, whether it's sand mining or, all of that is, we have been very callous about certain policies. So all of that actually contributes to what happens eventually. And I think this is why I said, Niresh, like, it's not enough for the government to tell people to leave. You also have to show them how, right? You have to build policies that actually help them to leave, that actually doesn't disrupt their lives as they, relocate. Unfortunately, in most of our relocation plans previously, even in Colombo, what we see is people's lives get heavily disrupted when they relocate, which is also why they are very reluctant to. Even if it's a very small house that you have, you're not willing to move because you're not sure about where you will be after the relocation. That has to be very clearly shown. That path has to be very clearly shown, that we are not trying to, pull you back, but we are trying to rebuild, put you in a better position in life. And when you give permissions, when you approve plans and so on, laws have to be strictly followed, I think. And you get so many complaints, I mean, before the disaster, and I think even after, there have been so many complaints by people about, the local authorities being very strict or not passing their plans, so on and so on, right? And there was also a culture of corruption, we should not forget, where you could actually pay something and then get your plans passed. So all of that has to be actually stopped. All of that, so we have to rethink how we plan and how we build our houses, how we build our buildings. Those have to be very carefully, and it has to be done in a planned environment. You can't just do it ad hocly just because you want something, you want a building here, you can't build it there. You have to, but then there also has to be then areas earmarked or areas reserved for housing, right?
Right.
For commercial establishments.
Right.
You can't just ask people, they can't find their own areas.
Yes. But
right?
this is simple town planning.
Exactly, town planning.
And you have, in every local authority, you have a town planning department.
Yeah.
And certainly in the UCs and the municipal councils, you have that.
Yeah.
But
we have also seen those institutions themselves who come up with these zoning regulations, later on, adjusting them according to maybe pressure from communities, right? So instead of looking at whether the physicality of the area.
So let's call it what it is, political nepotism, influence.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, for real, it has been political influence, but I think now is the time to change. There shouldn't be any political influence in terms of I think even for our local councils, because we control most of our local councils, right? We also have a special sense of responsibility at the very bottom level for the mayor, for the member of the council, to make sure that you're not actually contributing to a future disaster by making sure that you're putting pressure on the government officials to pass something. That should not happen. I think that is something that was very commonly happening. And moving forward, we have to make sure that everything is scientific, that due consideration is given to these institutions who, like the irrigation department, the NBRO, these are institutions who have scientific knowledge of what is happening. UDA, Urban Development Authority, and all of these institutions have to be respected without taking away from their expertise and scientific knowledge that they have. That, I think, that is something that was very lacking in our system. Because you want to do well for the people, you don't think too much ahead. You think, okay, having some kind of a house, having some kind of a commercial establishment will do them good, and local leaders want to support. These are not entirely badly intended moves also, right? You just feel like you're supporting the people, but in the long run, you're actually pushing them into a calamity. So expertise knowledge has to be respected. Everything has to be derived scientifically and well planned, and even in areas where the poorest of the poor resides, that has to be the policy that we take forward. Yeah.
And we are almost out of time, so my final question is your thoughts on Sri Lanka rebounding from this in 2026.
Yeah.
How confident are you, and how fast are we going to do this?
I think our country has been a very resilient country. If you look at the number of calamities that we have faced, you name it, every kind of problem we have had for the past.
A lot of it was man-made.
A lot of it was man-made, but a lot of it was natural also, right? And but as a country, we have been very resilient, and our people have always had the hope of doing better. And I think we have, as a country, as a society, we have also managed to move forward, in spite of all the things that's pushing us back. We have also managed to be very active in pushing the country forward. And especially with our government, I think we're living in an era where everybody is very keen on pushing that agenda forward, right? Whether it's politically in terms of governance, whether in terms of the economy, or, you know, society-wise, culture-wise, we have very progress-oriented, future-oriented thinking we have, right? So that is going to be the key that drives us forward, the resilience of our people. Even if you look at the post-disaster response, so many number of volunteers, thousands of volunteers have come forward. I think you also might have an experience with the work that you're doing here at the youth service, the Tarun Seva Sabha, the Youth Services Council. You have thousands of volunteers working, and even in the local level, you have people moving from districts who are not affected to districts that are affected, trying to help them. And I think this is the kind of society, sense of society, solidarity and resilience that we need to move forward, and we already have it, right? So that is a huge plus point for Sri Lanka. And the second point is, of course, whether we have a plan going forward, right? Which is why we have the Rebuilding Sri Lanka plan, which will have all this expertise knowledge at one level and at one table, whether it's the engineers, the planners, you know, people who actually have the knowledge to rebuild the country, will be brought into one forum where they will be, you know, guiding the government, supporting the government to make the right decisions in terms of development in a scientific manner. And then we are very confident that we will be able to finance that also. Rebuilding Sri Lanka also has a financing component, but we are also working with our international partners and making sure that because we're a country coming out of bankruptcy, this is a huge hit for us, that is true. But then you also see a lot of countries coming forward to support our country, especially our neighboring countries and, you know, our friendly countries. They have come forward, and the international partners also have been very cooperative. So I think moving forward is a challenge. It's a huge challenge, but I think we are at a position and we are in a place where, you know, we are in a strong place to move forward. In spite of what has happened, I think we're in a strong place to move forward. So with the support of our people, with the understanding of our people, and the support of the international partners, and the support of, you know, everybody, this is a national mission. And I think I saw the news that Chandrika Bandaranakumartunga, the former president, has offered 250 million. I think that level of vote of confidence is massive, I think, even for the government, right? To know that there is national interest, despite party differences, despite previous maybe hostilities and animosities, that there are former leaders who are willing to come forward and do that, is a huge vote of confidence on the government. And it shows that the moving forward is going to be a national task. It's not going to be something that can be done with divisive politics and, you know, partisan politics. It is going to be a national task, and we are very hopeful. We did not see that kind of contribution from our, you know, established opposition, but it's very refreshing to see that coming from her. So I think we are in a position to think nationally, to move forward nationally, and build much better than where we were. And government is committed to that, and I am fully confident that every sector of the society is also committed to that.
Thank you very much, Lakmali Hemachandra, Member of Parliament. Lot of encouraging words indeed. And thank you to you at home for watching. Don't go away because the news is coming up next. Have a great evening.